Brennan Manning, the author of Vinnie's Ragamuffin Gospel, one time made a statement that I found to be so profound. He said that Jesus did not proclaim his gospel, give his life away on a cross, and rise from the dead so we could go to the 11 o'clock Mass on Sunday morning. Rather, Jesus proclaimed the gospel, gave his life away on a cross, and rose from the dead so that we could become brand new people, transformed in our mind, the way we see, the way we perceive reality, and the way we love in the depth of our being. Clearly, Jesus was about the transformation of the human being. Jesus taught that human beings suffer from a mistaken identity, that we all have a tendency to live on a certain level of externals where we see ourselves in terms of what we have and what we look like and what happens to me, and we remember who treated me a certain way and we hold on to that. And that oftentimes when we walk around, if we take a look at how we see ourselves, it's based on all of these externals. That's why in today's gospel, Jesus says, whoever loses his life will find his life, and whoever keeps his life will lose his life. So if we could look at that, it's so powerful. Jesus is saying you have to lose this external identity that you have formed of yourself in order to really discover and understand who you really are. Now, what we could say about this self, this mistaken identity, today we would call it your egoic self. It's based on all of these external trappings. So Jesus is saying, if you really want to discover who you are, you have to let go of these egoic identifications. I'd like to present to you three levels of awareness that perfectly depict this presentation that Jesus had of an ordinary awareness, a spiritual awareness, and then a divine awareness. Now, if we think of this in terms of a metaphor of a lake, think of a lake where on the surface, if it's windy, the waves are choppy, it might be whitecaps, and it's going back and forth, a lot of churning. That would be looking at our life in terms of this ordinary level of awareness, so that who we are, our sense of self, is all based on externals, and we're going up and down. We're anxious and we're happy and we're fearful and we're worried about what people think about us, and we want to get recognized and we want to be appreciated. And then if we're not, we're all bent out of shape about that. And so that we're constantly in this up and down in this level of awareness, ordinary awareness. Now, most of us live on that level. We are all right now, we're aware that we're in this church. We're aware what day it is. We might be aware of other things that we have to do later on in the day, all these different functions that we have. So that is what you typically have, is that ordinary level of awareness where most of us live. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but if we're only living on that, we're really not going to experience what Jesus came for, which is about transformation. Because living on that external level of awareness, ordinary awareness, we have a tendency to see people as objects. We look at them in terms of it's us versus them. So we feel a sense of separation where there's a lot of conflict. We can get into a lot of comparison. We can move into, in order for me to be right, I have to make you wrong. There can be no sense of coming together when we're living on that level of awareness. So let me ask you a question. Are you kind of with me here? Are you getting, you getting this? Are you identifying with what I'm saying? Is this resonating with you? So now let's go deeper in this lake. So we move from the surface of the lake, and we move down, kind of like still waters run deep, and we look at like underneath the surface where there's like a calming, there's a stability to that. So in a spiritual level of awareness, we move deeper into understanding that who we really are is invisible. We are a spiritual consciousness. We are an awareness that lives forever and that goes way beyond what you can see, feel, and touch. To go deeper into this level of awareness. Now, this awareness, we tap into it every once in a while, but we only put our toe in the pool, kind of a thing. We don't really hang out in that enough. That's why we hear the passage in the Old Testament in Psalms, be still and know that I'm God. That in order to really live deeper in this level of awareness, we have to practice silence. We have to practice contemplative prayer. We have to go by ourselves and be in silence. Now, when we live in the spiritual level of awareness, we start to see our oneness with people. We start to understand, we start to take a look at like where people are coming from rather than looking at them externally. Hey, they don't look like me. They're different than me. They think differently than me. They believe differently than me. And we get into all those judgments. We move into a different level of relating to people, and we see more of our oneness with each other where we can come together in a much more powerful way. Now, what happens when we live in this deeper level of awareness, the spiritual level of awareness, which is really who we are, what happens is this then gives access to the most powerful presence that we can even imagine. This indwelling presence of the living God. Meister Eckhart talked about the soul, the part of our soul that lives in God, and then this God that lives in our soul. It's this indwelling presence that seems to get accessed only when we move out of the ego and into a deeper, more spiritual understanding of who we are. A good way to illustrate this is when we look back a couple of weeks ago, we heard the gospel passage of Mary and Martha. And we hear that story where Martha is preparing the dinner, and she's all upset. And she's very busy. She's very capable, and she's taking care of a lot of things. But she's also very stressed out. She's very judgmental. She's manipulative. She's all bent in a shape that Mary's not helping her. She's not getting appreciated, and she's not being paid attention to. And she really sells Mary under the bus and comes to Jesus and says, "Can you tell my sister to help me prepare the meal?" So Martha is representing that ordinary level of awareness. Mary, on the other hand, is sitting in the presence of Jesus. She's sitting in the presence of the divine. For Mary, preparing the meal is really not the issue. She's already sitting at the banquet table in the presence of Jesus. And it is through that experience that Mary is having that she enters into and encounters this divine indwelling presence inside of her. Now, it's not that Martha is wrong and Mary is right. I mean, obviously there's things we have to attend to in our lives. So ordinary awareness is a part and an important part of our life. But what we have to make sure of is not only does there need to be a balance, but the ordinary awareness must be in service to and take a back seat to spiritual awareness. We have to have an ability to integrate the two into the way we live our life, because it is through, again, that spiritual awareness that we're able to tap into and experience the indwelling presence of the living God. In the gospel passage today, again, we hear Jesus talk about the kingdom of God, talking to the Pharisees who don't seem to understand matters of the heart, and they want to know, well, when is this kingdom coming? And Jesus is like, you guys just don't get it. The kingdom of God isn't some place that you go to. The kingdom of God is a state of being that already exists within you and is in your midst, Jesus says. But it can only be experienced and realized when we practice this contemplative prayer. We handed out the poem of the man in the mirror. And so often, what do, right? We check ourselves out in the mirror and we're looking at ourselves in terms of how's our hair and we're going to put a makeup on or whatever. We have to like make sure it's all clean, or guys, we shave. And so we kind of have that external, superficial checking ourselves out in the mirror. But what I'd like to challenge everybody here to do is to really, really look in the mirror. Look into your eyes. Look into that you that is inside, that goes beyond that physical appearance. And think about that. I think it's a great exercise to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I love you. And see what comes up. I've done this myself, and there's times I look in there and I say, well, there's some things I feel good about. And yet when I look, it's like, there's a little part of me that I'm not feeling so hot about myself. And I need to clean that up. I need to really take a look at what is going on in there that I'm not having that sense of appreciation and acceptance of who I am. It's such an important thing to do. To go deeper within as you look into the mirror. And then, after you look in the mirror, I'd like to ask all of you to spend 10, 15 minutes quietly in silence and in prayer each day. And I guarantee you, if you do that, if you spend that time alone in silence, you will begin to experience a power, a presence that is always within you, always available, that will enable you to be less affected by all the externals. You'll find yourself start living your life from the inside out and not the outside in. Stop letting the outside dictate and determine your state of being, but take your state of being to those external situations and problems and watch yourself have an amazing ability to solve your problems, to handle the difficulties that you have in your life. Why is that? Because you're realizing that you're handling all of those life situations with the power and the presence of the living God.